Guys, my name is Reese Alley. I'm a partner and CEO at a company called SCA Construction, and I wanted to make this specific video and take a little break from the day to discuss how to settle lawsuits before they even get started. And obviously, if they escalate past litigation and get to that point, there's just some things you got to handle and deal with when you get to that point. There's been a handful of situations in the past 3 years. I've been threatened to be sued or in litigation or actually sued about 5 times. And the 5th time just happened recently. Earlier this year, we had a little scuttle with someone that wanted a demand for us to finish a project. And this one is a little bit different. We got a demand letter in the mail on Tuesday of last week that wanted $128,000 returned after we just finished one phase of a project, and they wanted it in 10 days. The reason, the backstory behind all that, I'm not going to go too far into it. Basically, we had an emergency project where we put phase 1 on there, and then once a set of plans was established, we would bid phase 2, because obviously we didn't know what we were going to be doing until we got the plans. We ended up doing it, but the kicker here was we went through a consultant that was hired by the community, which we worked with them before, but this is a pretty big project for them. And what we ended up finding, and this is super obvious by the demands that they were asking for in the letter, that a lot of the communication that I had throughout the process and my team had with the board of directors never actually made it to the board of directors. If you can imagine, this is like a game where in school, everybody's sitting around in a circle, and then I whisper into your ear, and then they whisper in somebody else's ear, and then by the time it gets to the 10th person, it's a completely different story. Working with this consultant specifically, obviously they have fiduciaries to the board about getting certain communication in there and to the board in a timely manner. It's clear a lot of that didn't happen. And so now we're on the hook, supposedly on the hook for $128,000, although it's a huge miscommunication. I do believe we owe them a little bit of money. Obviously, instead of talking about it or having a meeting, they just went straight to lawyers. And so now we've got to craft a document and go through that process. How do you avoid all of that happening? How do you make sure it doesn't get to that point? More importantly, one of the best skills that you will have and come across and develop over time is how to settle conflict before it actually gets to full-scale litigation, and then obviously the courtroom, where you have to hire a lawyer. Everything gets expensive, and really nobody wins except the lawyers. So there's 3 things that I thought of that I want to go over that in past history as I've been going through these processes and having about $500,000 of these kinds of letters in the past, that vast majority I've been able to settle. I've come down to 3 different things that I think are really warranted, that if you can do these 3 things, that I really think it decreases your chances of going to a lawsuit, and then if there is conflict that arises, you can settle it. In the very beginning, that is in-person meetings. I cannot tell you how important it is to have in-person meetings, especially when there are multiple parties involved. It's a little bit easier when there's just you and then a customer, but especially when there's a board of directors and it's you and then maybe there's an engineer involved and then they've got a consultant as well, and then the board is going through the consultant and you have to talk to him first. And it's really easy for miscommunications to happen. If you have in-person meetings, especially when you're in the design phase and especially before you sign the contract, it really dies down the chances of a big miscommunication happening before a contract is signed and monies are exchanged. The second is contract review. I think there is a point to where when you have a large enough contract and it's a large enough ticket price, that could be, if it's out of your ballpark and a $5,000 project is huge, maybe you get a little bit of consultation there, a couple $100. If it's a $500,000 project, obviously it's also a good idea. There is a lot of things where, especially if you don't have a law background, I personally don't, over time as you get charged for these things and you have different issues that come up, you'll realize that when you read through a contract, all of the little words that you read over, you gloss over, it might be 1 sentence or a few words on a 15-page contract. And you think to yourself, that's not all the way true. That's not exactly what we agreed on. Maybe that's not perfectly worded from what we talked about, but it's a contract. I'm sure it's a standard form. I'm sure that's normal. And so you don't bring anything up on it. Those are the kinds of things that it could be a 3-word thing that you thought about and you didn't bring up, and it costed you $100,000, or at least someone's demanding that much money because of 3 simple words that you never brought up, that you didn't think it was really that big of a deal. You might have communication otherwise that states that, but if it's in the contract, it's going to be pretty tough to fight unless you've got really good communication to back it up. The third thing is email communication. Again, this is something to where this is like the sugar, it's the galvanizing aspect of all of this, especially when you have to go into a little bit of defense mode. There's a lot of things where, let's say you get an email from a customer, a client, an engineer, whoever it is a question. Let's say, hey, this is John Reese. I just wanted to ask you a question about clarification on this part of the contract. I know you said $50,000 for this retaining wall, but we wanted to make sure that it was this kind of block, whatever it is. And it's really, really easy when you're running around, you're in the truck, you're on a job site, to just give them a call and say, hey, John, let's get on the phone and talk about this. The problem with that is, please stay with me on this. Listen to me, look me in the eyes, and listen to when I say, that's great until it's not. But what happens on the back end if John comes back and he says, man, I think this is great, but I really thought we had talked about this kind of block. Or you said you were going to do GeoGrid on every course, or whatever it is. He asked that question and you answered his question. And that might have been fine, but you can't go back and look at phone calls. You can only go back and look at email communication, text messages, letters, all that kind of thing. What was on the contract? And so if there ever is any kind of miscommunication on the back end, you need to be always building your case. ABCs. A lawyer taught me this that was a partner at a $100 million concrete company. It stuck with me ever since. When he said ABCs, always be closing, the sales term, but it's always be building your case. Obviously, there's a little B. It's still a great acronym because you really need to. And if you get in the habit of that, it becomes, one, super easy to settle conflict before it gets to something that's uncontrollable. If it does get to something that is a little bit heated, it's so much easier to go back and put together a beautiful document that can illustrate a lot of those miscommunications and maybe fill in the different parties involved about who might have got lost where or what that looks like. I hope this helps. I hope y'all can learn from some of my mistakes. I am still writing this letter as we speak to diffuse this $128,000 letter. I think we can do it. I feel really confident about it. If you guys have any questions, again, I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice at all. Just sharing from my experience so far. So if this helps, like, subscribe. Let me know if you have any comments in the box below.